The Lone Hitchhiker. It was early in November, and I was in Freiburg, in the south of Germany, near the Swiss border. I'd been there for 3 months, working with an ecological organisation which was setting up a music and exhibition tour around Europe. It was called SET, the Sustainable Europe Tour, and it was about to continue at the beginning of June. I was applying for sponsorship and writing to different organisations in different countries, asking what they could offer for the tour to go there. It was all about sustainable energy, things like how to use your car less, and suggesting and demonstrating many other ways of living with a lower level of energy consumption, and using cleaner energy sources such as wind power, wave power and solar power. It also featured exhibitions about the different sustainable villages and communities around Europe, permaculture and things like that. Anyway, after about 3 months I decided that I had been there long enough and wanted to go somewhere else. So I tried to decide where I should go. I didn't want to go back to England or Scotland, but whilst in Poland, in August, I met 2 people from Budapest in Hungary, who had invited me over to stay there for a while, so I decided that that was the perfect option. Now at this time I had a car, and I also had a lot of recording equipment and things. However, I did not have the money for the petrol to take the car, so I decided to hitchhike, which turned out to be not necessarily the best idea. For some reason I started hitchhiking at about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I had a rather uneventful journey through Germany. I got to Salzburg at 3 o'clock the next day. I think it was a Saturday afternoon, 12.5 hours later. So I went out onto the motorway in Salzburg and held out my sign, which said in big bold letters, Budapest. I waited, and I waited. Now, when I set out, I had a bag full of clothes, but by the time I got a lift rather late in the night, my bag was empty, as it was getting cold and all my clothes were on my body. The further east I travelled, the deeper the snow got, and the colder it got. Eventually I got a lift halfway to Vienna, where I again got out at a service station, and waited quite a long time to try and find a lift. I eventually found someone who saw my sign and said, "Yes, we're going that way. You can come with us to Budapest." Now, what they didn't tell me was that they were towing a van across the border, and that they in fact had come from Hamburg, in the north of Germany, and were going to Romania, towing this van all of the way. But they had got this far. So I got in the van, in the back of the one which was being towed, and of course it had no heating in it, as it had no engine in it. The night went on, and we eventually arrived at the Hungarian border, where everybody was speaking different languages, none of which I understood, Romanian and Hungarian. There was the man who was towing the van, the man who was in the van that was being towed, and the customs officials. The problem, I found out, was that the Hungarian customs office would not allow this person to tow this van into the country, and there was a lot of arguing and shouting. It was very cold, and I was very tired, as this was the second night that I hadn't slept, and the second night that I'd been out in the cold as well. What eventually happened was that they had to leave the van being towed at the border, and they all got into the other van and drove across the border, while me and the other man who owned the van being towed had to walk across the border. Now it was the middle of the night, and there was nobody about, and we walked across the little side road around the place where the lorries go through. There was nobody there, and it was very dark, and all of a sudden a figure jumped out in front of us with a gun and pointed it at us. We raised our hands and said, "We're not doing anything," and he had a look at our passports and saw that they had been stamped, so he allowed us to continue walking on through, and we got into the other van and drove to the nearest garage in Hungary. I didn't have a clue where I was, and it was still dark and bitterly cold, and the snow was very deep, so I got out of the van, and the person whose van was being towed got into another lorry and disappeared. So I stood freezing at the all-night station and begged to go into the corridor and warm myself on the heater, which I was grudgingly allowed to do. As 6 o'clock in the morning arrived and the sun was rising, more people arrived to work at the petrol station, and one man came in and looked at me and asked, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I want to go to Budapest," showing him the sign. He said, "OK, I will go and ask some of the people in the station if they'll take you." He went and asked several people and kept on asking people if they would take me, but nobody would. Nobody seemed to be going to Budapest. It was only 150 kilometres away, but it didn't look like I was going to get there. So I waited at the entrance to the station with my little sign, and cars went past, and more cars went past, and still I had no luck. A few hours later, a lorry arrived at the service station with a van on it. It was the van that had not been allowed through customs at the border the night before. They all got out of the van and said, "Would you like to come to Budapest again?" And I, of course, said, "Yes, anything to get out of here." So I got into the van and was towed to the outskirts of Budapest, where I got out of the van feeling very pleased with myself that I had made it. I waited for a bus, and when one arrived, I asked to be taken to the centre of the town. The bus driver said yes, and charged me the money, and when he signalled to me, I asked if we were in the centre, and he said "Igen," which I understood to mean yes. I went straight to the telephone and telephoned my friend. The phone rang, but nobody answered. Now, this person was expecting my arrival the night before, and I concluded that they were no longer in. Feeling rather upset and still very cold, I went to a coffee shop and drank espresso coffee. I sat next to the heater and warmed myself up, and as I was starting to get a bit warmer, I tried to phone again. Eventually I got through to my friend, who was completely dismayed as they had been in all morning, but the phone had been dropped on the floor and the ringer had been accidentally switched off, so that they couldn't hear the phone ringing. They asked, "Where are you?" And as I didn't know, I gave the name of the street and described my surroundings, and my friend said, "I haven't a clue where you are, but you're certainly not in the centre. But I'll get the map and try to find it." Eventually they found the map, found the place, and came to collect me, and I've been here in Budapest ever since. I haven't hitchhiked again, and I don't intend to.